Welcome back to Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Joining me now, the lead fantasy football analyst for thescore.com in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and rabid and reeling Buffalo Bills fan, Justin Boone. Booner, what's going on, buddy?
I'm doing all right. I know the Bills lost last week, but there's a lot of reasons to be excited about that team, whether it's the defense or, the coaching staff, the front office. They're bringing the team along in the right way here. We just need the Patriots to move along. So maybe in a year or two, the Patriots will get out of the way here and the Bills will be able to take over that division moving forward.
Yeah, Bills defense is for real. Patriots defense is for real. Did a great job keeping Tom Brady at bay. Just one special teams touchdown away from a win. Josh Allen injury, he still hasn't cleared concussion protocol. Maybe you got to start up Matt Barkley again. I mean, it's a little bit of an anemic offense. Hopefully Devin Singletary's hamstrings feeling good, but you got the ageless Frank Gore and, got a promising strong defense.
It's going to be a tough game for the Bills this week, I think. Normally you say it's a letdown game after you win the week before. I think this might be a letdown game just because how hyped they got for that Patriots game. And it comes so close and end up losing in the end. And now this Tennessee team, for as bad as their offense is, they're very similar to the Bills in the sense that their defense is underrated, their defense is really improving, and their offense is the work in progress here. And at home, Tennessee's got a pretty good shot, I think, to get a win this week against Buffalo. It'll be a good game, though.
Yeah, after, beating the Browns to open the season and having two disappointing losses, 17 and 7 points against the Colts and Jags. They come out and put up a 24 spot on the road against a pretty bad Falcons defense. But yeah, let's take a look at your starts and sits. You can find this, of course, folks, on thescore.com. Justin likes Kyler Murray, quarterback, rookie for the Arizona Cardinals, at Cincinnati, playing against another team that's kind of reeling. A big news coming out of course, Arizona. Christian Kirk injured. A lot of fantasy pundits, not sure if you're one of them, after last week, they finally got David Johnson, the running back, involved in the passing game. And some people are saying keep him in the slot and put Chase Edmonds full-time in the backfield. Nevertheless, you like Kyler Murray, who in PPR is around the 15 mark, so he's kind of the middle class right now in terms of his starters. But you like him as your start of the week at quarterback, yes?
Yeah, he's going to be a QB1 this week, in my opinion. And the reason is I know people aren't excited about what he's done so far. I think a lot of people thought, including myself, that he was going to come in and this offense was really going to move the ball and he was going to run a lot and they were going to push the ball downfield. That hasn't really happened so far. It's been high volume for sure. They're leading the league in pace of play from Football Outsiders metric there. But the problem is they're really throwing short. They're keeping everything near the line of scrimmage. And that's great for guys like Larry Fitzgerald or Christian Kirk when he was healthy. Both those guys are playing in the slot. David Johnson, like you mentioned, he's getting a ton of work as a rusher and a receiver. I don't know if I agree that they should keep him out in the slot and keep him in the passing game full time. I think you got to mix him up. But Chase Edmonds is one of the better weapons on this offense, and he's not getting used. And when you're looking at that receiving core, now you're down with a couple injured guys here and going back to even the preseason when rookie Hakeem Butler went on the IR. So you've lost a couple guys to injury there. It would make a lot of sense to get Chase Edmonds involved. But from a fantasy perspective, the reason you got to get excited about them, I talked about the pace of play there for the Cardinals. The Bengals are right up near the top of the league as well. They're in the top 7, so there's going to be a ton of volume in this game. And we saw a couple weeks ago when the Bengals played the Bills, Josh Allen was able to run against them. He put up 46 yards. I think we're going to see a game here from Murray where he's going to be able to throw the ball a lot. He's going to get some chances to run the ball. And the Bengals are just not that good of a team. Now, the Cardinals aren't either, and it's risky sometimes getting involved in a game where there's two bad teams because as much as it could be a shootout, it could also be a really low-scoring game. But in this one, I'm projecting it to be pretty high-scoring. I think there's going to be a lot of volume, and I think if you start Murray this week, you're going to be pretty happy about it.
Other QBs you like, Jameis Winston on the road against New Orleans, Jacoby Brissett on the road against a Kansas City team who has pretty weak defense. A lot of QBs have put up points against them. And you like Andy Dalton against the Cardinals. So you just think the whole game's going to be high scoring. The thing that intrigues me there, Jameis Winston in New Orleans after putting up a 55 spot against LA on the road. You think that the Tampa Bay offense is going to keep rolling? Yes?
I like what we're seeing from Jameis now, and I know that offense got off to a slow start, and I'm not sure if whether it was with you a couple weeks ago or whether it was on my podcast, but I've talked recently about the fact that when teams start off slow, especially offenses, you got to give them a couple weeks. If you think that they're talents and that they can produce, you got to give them a couple weeks to get going here. We might be seeing that from this Bucs offense. They have a new coaching staff, so there's a learning process there. And now, after a couple games that weren't so great, Jameis has put up back-to-back good performances here. And that Rams game was shocking to me because I expected them. They were on the road going against the tough Rams defense, especially with some really good corners on the outside, and they were able to do pretty much whatever they wanted against them. Now they're going against the Saints. I know they're on the road again, but the way to attack the Saints is through the air. They have Sheldon Rankins, their defensive tackle back. He really helps their run stopping. Now you're going to have Jameis go in there, be able to throw over the top. I'd really like him to have another good game. And a couple weeks ago, I didn't think I would have said that. Jacoby Brissett against the Chiefs, just a game where I expected the Colts are going to have to throw more than they're used to. And Brissett's been surprisingly good for fantasy this year. As sad as we were about losing Andrew Luck, Brissett comes out, has multiple touchdown passes in every single game this season. So that's been pretty impressive from him. And then Andy Dalton, it's pretty much the exact same thing I said about Murray. It's going to be the pace of that game, a lot of volume in that game. And a lot of people are going to be off Andy Dalton this week because he was terrible on Monday night last week. But you can go back to him this week as a streamer.
Good stuff. Actually, you reminded me about something. Thursday night's game, the Rams lose on a missed field goal with just like 10 seconds left, and the Seahawks top them. In terms of fantasy, what were the biggest takeaways from Thursday night? I know as a Brandon Cooks owner, I'm not very happy. You know, if you're a Robert Woods owner, you're probably looking for more. Cooper Kupp is establishing himself as a wide receiver one. Todd Gurley gets 2 touchdowns, so if you fired him up, you're pretty good. You also have Will Dissly and DK Metcalf. What were the biggest fantasy takeaways from the Thursday night football as the Seahawks beat the Rams 30-29?
Well, we confirmed a couple things that we already knew, which was Russell Wilson is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and all the worries that we had that the volume wasn't going to be there from him, he's just getting it done on efficiency. He is so good running the ball, passing the ball. He can get it done, and now we're seeing some more weapons emerge in that offense for him, not just Tyler Lockett, who I talked about as potential number one receiver for fantasy, and he's really putting that up now after 4 weeks. I think after 5 games now, we can say that he is in that conversation. But Will Dissly, everyone asked who's going to be the George Kittle this season. Seems like Dissly might be the answer to that question. And even going back to last year before he got hurt, pretty much every game he's played as a pro, he's been able to put up pretty decent points. And it's shocking for a guy that was coming into the league as more of a blocker than a receiver, but they've found out a way to get the most out of him. DK Metcalf, he's going to be a little bit volatile for fantasy, but he's been able to produce. When he connects on those long balls, he's going to put up some good days and get a pretty good fantasy day on Thursday night. With the Rams offense, though, that's where there's more questions. And when I talk about we confirm that Russell Wilson is a good quarterback, we also confirm something about Jared Goff. It's that at home, Jared Goff is a very good fantasy quarterback. On the road, not so much. So that was the case with Ben Roethlisberger a couple years ago where he had very drastic home road splits. Now we have to be a little bit concerned about Goff when he's going on the road here. He really hasn't been getting it done. Cooper Kupp for sure has been getting it done. Brandon Cooks leaves the game in concussion protocol there, so a little concerning. We'll have to watch whether he's going to be available next week. Robert Woods continues to get the targets. He's just not getting it done with them, unfortunately. And last week we saw him do it. He put up a big game, but he's had 3 games this year now where he hasn't been able to put up decent days, despite the fact that he's still getting the volume. So that's unfortunate. But last night could be a completely different conversation if he gets that second foot in bounds for the 1 touchdown. If he gets that done, then now we're saying, oh, Robert Woods has a pretty decent game again. So it can be that close when you're talking about fantasy production. So I'm still okay. I still have Woods as a wide receiver 2, maybe a low-end wide receiver 2 now, but he's still going to be fine there. And one of the biggest revelations last night was Gerald Everett, the tight end for the Rams. This is a guy who has the talent. When he got drafted, the expectation was Sean McVay is going to try to turn him into a Jordan Reed type tight end in this offense. And unfortunately, in the first couple seasons, that never happened. He wasn't getting the volume. They have those three receivers. They didn't really need to use the tight end. I think last year, after what happened in the Super Bowl at the end of the season there, I think Sean McVay must have went back to the drawing board and realized that they need to have someone else in this offense. They need to find another way to move the ball downfield. And last night we saw it with Gerald Everett. He came through, had a really big game, over 100 yards in that one. Not someone that I'm going to rush out to pick up and get right into my lineup, but maybe you want to stash him just to see if this is something that's going to continue. And Todd Gurley, volume not really there for him. Didn't have a big game yardage-wise, but he found the end zone twice, and he's still right on the fringe of that low-end running back 1, high-end running back 2 for fantasy.
Nicely said, sir. Let's continue on. Let's go to the running back position. It looks like your start of the week is going to be the duo of the returning Melvin Gordon and a real fantasy superstar, at least for the first month, Austin Eckler. That might change now, of course, with the carries. Of course, they're probably going to have to share those for the Chargers. And they, of course, host the Denver Broncos, who are looking very weak at defense. You know, Von Miller doesn't look like the defense is living up to Vic Fangio's expectations. And other running backs you like, David Montgomery on the road in London versus the Raiders. Sony Michel seems a little touchdown dependent early on. They travel to Washington, who looks like a mess. And Jordan Howard has emerged as the fantasy relevant running back in Philadelphia. They host the New York Jets. Let's start with the Chargers. You think both Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon are good starts this week?
You're almost never going to see Melvin Gordon in a start-sit column, and if it was one of the previous games this year, you would have never put Austin Eckler in there. And the reason isn't that they don't belong. Obviously, you're going to start them. It's that it's just too obvious, right? You don't need me to tell you to start those guys. This week, the reason I wanted to put them in, though, is because I do think you can play both of them. And I know people are worried. I get a lot of questions. Should I play Melvin Gordon? Should I play Austin Eckler? Should I be trading these guys away? And I've tried to explain it as this. This week, you're going to see closer to a 50-50 split as they work Gordon back into the offense. I don't think they're going to bring him in here and give him 25 carries or something like that, because there's a big risk when he sits out that long. There is a risk of soft tissue injury. So they're going to bring him back, ease him in, give them 50-50 touches here. But they're going against the Broncos. And if anybody remembers last week, the Broncos went against the Jags. The Jags put up 267 rushing yards on that Broncos defense. The Broncos lose Bradley Chubb for the year. He's more of a pass rusher, but still another weapon on that defense gone. So I think the Chargers are going to be able to go in there, run the ball with ease against that defense, and they're going to want to have both those running backs going. I think they're both going to have a lot of success on the ground. And then I also think Austin Eckler is going to use more in the passing game because the injuries that they have in that receiving core. Right now, Keenan Allen is really the only guy that you can trust. They had to put Dontrell Inman on IR. Mike Williams is dealing with this back injury. We're not sure if he's going to play or not. Hunter Henry's still a couple weeks from coming back. They don't really have a weapon at tight end there. So Austin Eckler, we were talking earlier about David Johnson getting used more in the slot and as a receiver. We might see a situation where both these backs are on the field at the same time, with Gordon in the backfield and Eckler split out wide being used as a receiver there, which would be very exciting, not just for this week, but moving forward here for Eckler's value. But this week, I think they're both going to be top 20 fantasy backs. Moving forward, Gordon will bump up a little bit, get into that RB1 conversation, and Eckler will drop down a little bit. He'll be more of a fringe RB2, maybe more of a flex play moving forward. But it really is going to depend on how much he's going to get used in that passing game, which I think is still going to be a lot. Quickly to mention those other guys you talked about, we've been waiting for the David Montgomery breakout game for a while here. They're playing the Raiders in London. This could be the game where it finally happens, especially with Chase Daniel at quarterback. They're going to want to lean on the running game even more there. I think he's going to run wild against the Raiders. Sony Michel, you talked about it. It's all about the touchdowns with him. Well, guess what? Going against the Redskins, there's going to be a lot of scoring opportunities for that Patriots offense. So I like him this week, and it's a very similar situation for Jordan Howard. It's not that I think Jordan Howard's going to continue to put up over 100 yards from scrimmage like he did last week. It's that he's going against the Jets. He's going to get these touchdown opportunities. So very excited to have him in my lineup, and somebody that I don't know that fantasy owners are going to want to trust. But this week, you definitely can trust him against that Jets team.
Yeah, Eckler fans would hope that you are right. Number 2 in PPR with not only his rushing, but, of course, 6 catches, 96 week 1, 6 catches, 67 yards week 2, 7 catches, 45 in week 3, and 5 catches for 62 yards in total. 3, 4, 5, 6 touchdowns already. So Austin Eckler is proven dividends for people that drafted him in the late rounds. Let's take a look at your wide receivers. Looks like your start of the week is Will Fuller, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. You know, quarterback Deshaun Watson hasn't had a lot of time to throw, but they're hosting the Atlanta Falcons. You also like Hollywood Brown traveling for the Ravens to Pittsburgh. Curtis Samuel, Carolina, hosting, of course, Jacksonville. And Calvin Ridley on the road, as mentioned, playing Houston in Houston. Let's talk about Will Fuller. That seems like a receiver kind of out of left field. Why do you think he's going to have a good week?
Well, it's been surprising that the last 3 weeks, both Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins haven't really done that much. And prior to this year, we saw whenever Fuller was on the field with Deshaun Watson, they produced big numbers, right? The efficiency was crazy, and we thought, oh, it's going to regress. We didn't think it was going to regress to this point. Now I think we're going to see it go the other way. Fuller is too talented to not be able to produce in this offense. And now going against this Falcons defense, I think you brought them up before, that they are completely floundering. Last week, we saw the Titans receivers come in, and the Titans receivers had been terrible prior to that, and they came in and both put up big days. We had A.J. Brown go for 3 for 94 and 2 touchdowns. You had Corey Davis, 5 catches, 91 yards and a touchdown. So we're going to see something similar this week with Hopkins having a big day, with Will Fuller having a big day, and Kenny Stills more of a game-time decision. We're not sure if he's going to play or not, so that also would just help Fuller get even more work, even more looks downfield against the Falcons defense that we're going to be targeting in fantasy every week at this point. That team is going in the wrong direction, unfortunately, on defense. The receivers, you don't want to base your fantasy decisions on guys being due. That is not very sound logic to go from, but all 3 of these guys right here are completely due. Marquise Brown, near the top of the league in air yards. It's going to happen for him at some point. We saw it happen in week 1. This offense is going to get back on track in this game against the Steelers. Him and Lamar Jackson are going to connect. Brown is just too talented. Kind of like I said about Fuller. You're going to start to hit on these long balls. They're going to connect at some point. I like it to happen for Brown against the Steelers. Curtis Samuel going against the Jags. He seems to be the favorite target of Kyle Allen right now. Before, when Cam Newton was under center, DJ Moore was getting more targets. When Kyle Allen took over, it shifted over to Samuel. We know Jalen Ramsey is not going to play in this game, so that helps the Panthers receivers as well. So like Samuel on that one. And Calvin Ridley, it's been sort of a shell game in that Falcons offense. Who's going to get the targets? And unfortunately, hasn't been Ridley. Every time you turn it over, it's been Julio Jones or Austin Hooper, the tight end, or Mohamed Sanu. But last year, we saw Ridley flash more than once. And coming into this season, we expected a lot more from him in that matchup against the Texans. Going to be another situation where we could see a big shootout in that one on both sides, with the offenses kind of going wild in the passing game because the defenses aren't going to be able to stop very much.
Nicely put, sir. Let's go to tight end. Your start of the week, Jimmy Graham travels to Dallas with his Green Bay Packers to take on the Cowboys. You also like Austin Hooper, again at Houston. Eric Ebron still looking for a big game. He's up against that weak Kansas City defense. And Tyler Eifert spent most of his NFL career injured. You like him on the road against the Arizona Cardinals. Why is Jimmy Graham your start of the week at tight end?
Well, Devontae Adams having the turf toe injury, not being in there, that's the biggest reason. I think Graham's going to be the biggest beneficiary there because he has the connection with Rodgers that I don't totally know that we've seen it with the other wide receivers on that offense. Geronimo Allison early last season a little bit, but Marcus Valdes-Scantling, he has his moments, but doesn't always seem to be on the same page with Rodgers, unfortunately. Graham last week got 9 targets in that game, 6 catches, over 60 yards, and a touchdown. I think we're going to see something similar this week. The Cowboys, their stats against tight ends are kind of skewed because they've been pretty good the last few weeks, but they haven't really faced any good tight ends. The only good tight end they've faced is Evan Ingram in week 1, and he had 11 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown against them. Now, I don't think Graham is that kind of player anymore, so I don't think he's going to have a 100-yard day, but I think we're going to see a pretty good game from him here, over 70 yards. He'll find the end zone at least once in that one. And those other guys, Hooper, just getting volume. It's not a great matchup with the Texans, but he consistently is getting targets in that offense. Eric Ebron, it hurts his value a little bit that T.Y. Hilton looks like he's going to play, but they're going to have to try to keep up with the Chiefs. And Ebron, as much as he's not playing as many snaps as Jack Doyle, he's producing more than Doyle is. And that goes back even to last year. I know at one point in the fantasy season last year, I had Ebron. Doyle was injured. When Doyle came back, I got spooked and I traded Ebron away. But even with Doyle back in the lineup, Ebron continued to produce. And this year, even with the injuries they've had in the receiving core, even with Andrew Luck not there, Ebron still found the end zone a couple times. So I think he's got a chance to do that again this week. And Tyler Eifert is not someone that I would normally recommend at all, but the Cardinals have just been crushed every single week by tight ends. So the odds of Eifert finding the end zone in this one are pretty strong.
All right, let's take a look quickly through your sits. You don't like Baker Mayfield against what's looking like a very strong 49ers defense. They're on the road to play San Francisco. At running back, you think the Wayne Gallman train finally ends this week versus another team that's underachieving right now. They're on the road versus the Minnesota Vikings. Wide receiver DJ Chark, who is looking like Gardner Minshew's favorite receiver. You don't like him against a Carolina defense on the road. And O.J. Howard, a man that we keep talking about, it's still not happening for O.J. on the road versus New Orleans. Give me your thoughts on some of these sits.
Well, for Baker, it's all about that 49ers defense. They're coming off a bye week, so they're going to be rested. They're going to be prepared and very underrated. You look at Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, they're number 2 behind the Patriots. I don't think anyone would guess that at this point, but they have a very strong pass rush up front. They drafted Nick Bosa. They brought in Dee Ford. They had DeForest Buckner there as well. They're going to get a lot of pressure on Mayfield in this game because the problem with the Browns offense right now is the offensive line. And so now when you have this front that's going to present a ton of pressure, I think Mayfield's going to struggle in that game. Wayne Gallman, Saquon Barkley is like Wolverine at this point. I don't know how it's possible, but they gave him a 4 to 8 week recovery timetable, and he's already out there practicing, was acting like he had a chance this week. I think that was silly, but week 6 or week 7 seem pretty likely for him now. So Gallman, if you went out and spent a ton of money to get him on your fantasy team, not looking like the best decision. When one of the things I said about it was the first game he had was against the Redskins, and that game was going to be good for him, and it was. But after that, he has 2 very tough matchups, has the Vikings and the Patriots. The Vikings are this week. I really don't like him in that game. It's just a completely different defense to go up against than what he got last week, where the Redskins were falling apart all over the place. He was getting chunk plays because of it. The Vikings are not going to allow that to happen. So don't want to really start Gallman this week if I can avoid it. DJ Shark, I would love to have him in my lineup most weeks. But this week against the Panthers, he's going to have to go against James Bradbury. And one of the things that I love early in a fantasy season is when we start to recognize these players that are stepping up, that are becoming the new stars, the new household name. And Bradbury isn't really one yet, but he's going to get there. He's gone up against Mike Evans, held him to 4 catches and 61 yards. DeAndre Hopkins held him to 5 receptions for 41 yards. And as much as I think DJ Shark is a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside this season, that matchup's a very, very tough one for him there. So it's going to be a shadow coverage situation. Bradbury's going to chase them all over, and I don't think it's going to work out great for Shark. Now, I will say this. If it does, if Shark comes out and has another big game, and he had 3 huge games to start the year, last week, not as great, but he also had a touchdown called back. So that would have been 4 straight games with a score, really emerging as potentially a top 15, top 20 fantasy guy. If he can get it done in that matchup, he will be solidified there. He will be in my rankings in the top 15, top 20 the rest of the season, but I don't think it's going to happen for him. And O.J. Howard, it sucks to have
Poor
to say,
O.J.
the way he's getting used in this offense, one of the problems is their offensive line is not that strong. So what do you do to help with that? You keep your very good blocking tight end in to help chip, to help take on defenders, and that's leading him not running as many passing routes, and that's leading to fewer targets and just not the production that we thought. And it's unfortunate because he is just as good of a blocker as he is a receiver. He is a phenomenal all-around talent, and used in the right way, he could be right up there with Travis Kelce as arguably the best in the league. But in this offense right now, they're not using him that way. And he's made some mistakes this season. He is still a young player. He's in his third season. So we need him to mature a little bit. We need that coaching staff to recognize that he is very valuable in the passing game. I'm not sure that that's going to happen this season, at least not early this season. So he's somebody that you got to send to your bench. And I'm getting a lot of questions about people asking whether they should pick up other tight ends for him. One of the things I'm recommending is if you have Howard, go stash Chris Herndon of the Jets. Herndon has a great second half schedule, and he can come when he comes back next week after his suspension's over in week 6. He'll come back and give you maybe a boost in the arm, maybe be able to take over as your starter. But this matchup with the Saints, not a great one for Howard. And if you want to go get somebody like Eric Ebron or someone who might be on the waiver wire, I'm not totally against it here.
All right, he is the lead fantasy analyst, Justin Boone. You can find his work on thescore.com. Justin, A game, as always. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Always appreciate you having me, Jordan.
More Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Stick around. Welcome back to Let's Talk Sports Radio right here on 94.9 Bob FM. Joining me now, TSN's mixed martial arts reporter out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, Aaron Bronsteter. Aaron, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jordan. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Good stuff. And we start with tonight's UFC 243. It hits the Marvel Stadium in Melbourne, Australia. Unification fight between the interim champion, the undefeated Israel Adesanya, and I guess you would call him the current champion, Robert Whittaker, 20-4. You know, a great stylistic matchup, and many mixed martial arts fans are looking forward to this one. I would like to hear your take first because a highly anticipated fight, just two really, really good fighters, but drastically different styles. What do you think of this main event? Because I think it's one of the best of the year.
I wouldn't call their styles drastically different. They're both pretty much known as strikers, but their striking styles are very, very different. So I guess if you are going to draw some sort of contrast between them, it would probably be that. You know, you've got Whittaker, who likes to close the distance a little bit more, likes to be able to time his opponents and throw counters. And you've got another guy who likes to throw counters in Israel Adesanya, but in a far more unorthodox fashion. This matchup is phenomenal. It's a coin flip to me. That's why the odds are pretty much dead even. I just went on Twitter and put out a list of previous championship fights where the odds have been essentially even money, and the champs are 5-4 in those fights. So I guess they're even money for a reason. This is just one of those particular events where I think that it's a perfect storm because you have it in Australia. You've got an Australian fighter versus a New Zealander going toe-to-toe in front of pretty much what I think is going to be about 60,000 people in this Marvel Stadium in Melbourne. And it just comes at a perfect time for this market because Australia has become a more and more, I guess, deep market for mixed martial arts. You know, a lot of these fighters that originally, early on in the UFC, were not having a lot of success, have really started to evolve into some of the top mixed martial artists in different divisions. And I think that this couldn't have happened at a better time. It's a perfect storm. You know, they were going to have this event in Vegas in October. That's usually what they have earmarked. But once these two became on, a collision course, it was only fitting rather to have it in Australia because it's just such a big fight for that reason.
You know, you look at the fight itself, you said, I guess I misspoke, we're not drastically different, but I guess, you know, the way that they've gone about, you know, gaining victories and their titles are a little bit different. Adesanya, a patient kickboxer, former Glory champion, undefeated. He has 13 knockouts and he has 4 wins by decision. So he doesn't have a submission under his belt. But then you look at Robert Whittaker, you know, he's a black belt in karate and a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He told ESPN if he had to take it to the ground, he will. But I think what I've been reading online, I'm not sure if you agree with this, much like Kelvin Gastelum, people are wondering if Robert Whittaker is going to be able to get into the range of Israel Adesanya. And for Israel Adesanya, is he going to be able to put enough damage onto Robert Whittaker? I think this one might go to a decision. You know, you're going to see are you going to see a patient Israel Adesanya come out like he does in the first round and size up his opponent and throw feints and see how they react? Or, you know, is Robert Whittaker going to get frustrated if he doesn't land early and, you know, start to go into a war similar like he did with Yoel Romero? How do you see the flow of the offense from each guy breaking down?
Yeah, I think both of these guys are the type that like to feel out their opponent, and they both like to counter. So it could be a little bit of time before this thing really gets going, as you alluded to there. And the odds of this going over 3.5 rounds are about even. That's what they've set the total at. And I think that's, you get a lot of value in taking the over there, because I don't think that these two guys are going to come flying out of the gate. I think that they are very good at adapting to the fighting style of their opponent, but because they both are that sort of fighter, I think that it's going to take them both a little bit of time and a bit of a feeling out process to figure out exactly how they're going to make this the adjustments necessary to try to get the edge over their opponent. Again, this is one that I just think is razor thin. If I have to make a pick, I would go with Adesanya, but I think that it's just such a close fight that it's hard to know exactly how this one plays out. It could just be whoever feels better that day could end up having the better day. That's how even I think these guys are.
Who has more to lose in this fight? You have, Robert Whittaker. He hasn't been in the octagon 16 months. He's been marred with injuries, knee, staph infection, colitis. I believe he broke his hand versus Romero. The collapsed bowel and hernia. Some people, saying, he's one of the most talented fighters and pound for pound guys, in the world. But then you have an undefeated Israel Adesanya. Some say his path to this title fight has been, not as competitive. Some say Robert Whittaker has fought, more tougher fights. Who has more to lose here, since one is the interim champion and one is essentially the champion that had to give it up due to injury?
It's a great question. I spoke to Corey Warren at TSN about this today during our weekly Cage Convo segment about who has more to lose or who has more to gain from this. And again, it's so interesting because they're about a year apart in age, and they're just on such similar trajectories in their career. You've got Whittaker, who's undefeated at middleweight, and you've got Adesanya, who's undefeated overall. Personally, I think that Whittaker has more to lose. I think the expectation is that Whittaker is the better fighter, and that given that it's in Australia in front of such a big crowd, and the fact that he hasn't lost before, I think it would say a lot about Robert Whittaker if you were able to get a win against an undefeated guy like this in a good and a strong fashion. I think that it really will change the narrative around Robert Whittaker. I asked this was probably a couple of months ago. I asked my co-host on my podcast, Joe Valpolini, who was the champion in glory kickboxing at welterweight, who's actually called Adesanya's fights in the past as well, but this doesn't really relate to that. I said to him, he always says, "Why is everybody calling out Whittaker? Why do people want to fight Whittaker?" And I said, if you were in the UFC and you could fight any champion, who do you think you'd have the best chance against? And he was like, "Yeah, probably Whittaker." So I think that while people give Whittaker a lot of respect and credit, I don't think that his name is ever mentioned in like the pound for pound conversation, like you said earlier. I don't think a lot of people think that highly of Robert Whittaker as a champion. But I think if this can change that narrative completely, if he's able to beat Israel Adesanya, who's undefeated, similar age, in his prime, has looked really good in his UFC tenure, I think it would say a lot about Robert Whittaker. And I think that if he loses, that his legacy, unless he can win a championship again, could be called into question.
Why do you think that is about Robert Whittaker? Obviously there's the injuries, I think, but beating Yoel Romero twice, it's not like he has he's got a win over Jacare. He knocked him out. I mean, he's beaten some pretty good guys. You look at Adesanya, he's, the Gastelum fight was an absolute war. I think, that was a very entertaining fight and his biggest test. But I mean, he also, they've both beat Derek Brunson. Adesanya previously to that beat, again, a twilight of his career, Anderson Silva. Why do you think that is? That people aren't giving? Is it because the injuries? People underestimate Robert Whittaker?
I think the injuries is definitely part of it. I think a lot of it is circumstance. I always say this about Robert Whittaker, and it's what makes him a weird champion. He never won the undisputed title. He won the interim title from Yoel Romero, and then it became the undisputed title once George St. Pierre retired or relinquished the belt, rather. And then on top of that, he's also never officially defended the title because his last fight against Romero missed weight. So it doesn't even count as a title defense. That's what makes it very strange to me. He's never won the undisputed title. He's never defended the title. And I think that even though neither of those were his fault, because he earned the undisputed title once it was relinquished, and he earned a victory over Yoel Romero, even though Romero had missed weight and was ineligible to win the title. It was technically a non-title fight. That's the weird thing about it is people can't rack up the accolades for him. And, right now, Adesanya is the flavor of the week. He's beating people in impressive fashion. He's fought 4 times since Whittaker last fought. That's a lot of miles. and that's a lot of exposure and a lot of recency bias on everybody's part that we can't ignore. So I think that those are some of the reasons why Whittaker just doesn't get that same respect as a lot of other champions.
Let's take a look at the co-main event. You got Raging Al Iaquinta, 14-5-1 against Dan Hooker. You look at these two guys, Iaquinta coming off a loss via unanimous decision to Cowboys Cerrone, and then Hooker coming off that knockout of James Vick. I think Raging Al is, I don't know, he's got kind of a people's vibe around. Of course, this favors Dan Hooker because of where he's from. He's from New Zealand. A lot of New Zealanders will probably make the trip to Australia if they don't live there already. But, Al is, at least in my opinion, he's the guy that gave Khabib his biggest test, taking Khabib to decision. You got Dan Hooker, who is, again, coming off that knockout. But previous to that, he got beat up pretty good by Edson Barbosa last December. What do you think of the co-main?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because all of Hooker's wins have come by finish. And Al is notoriously hard to finish. I don't know if he has been finished, to be honest. I'm trying to think back. But I think he got submitted once actually by Mitch Clark, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that, but you can look that up. I know he got a guillotine choked by Mitch Clark.
He got back in 2011. He lost via submission to Pat Audenwood.
Okay, Pat Audenwood. And then there's also Mitch Clark.
Yes,
right?
in the Darce choke in 2014.
Yeah. Okay, so he's been finished twice. So he's a pretty notoriously hard guy to finish, and Dan Hooker is a finisher. So in a 3-round fight, I think you kind of have to look at Al as potentially being the fighter that has the advantages for that reason. Like he's not a guy that's going to quit very easily, and Dan Hooker's the same way. He's a really tough out as well. But if it goes the scorecards, I think you kind of have to lean Al. That said, Hooker looks fantastic in his last fight. Al's coming off a loss, so they might just be on different trajectories. But it's hard to say at this point.
Very nicely done. Any other fights you're looking forward to on this? Of course, you got Tai Tuivasa, the heavyweight. He's always entertaining as well. Post-fight match celebrations with the classic Shui. The one that got canceled looked good too. Raquel Pennington versus an injured Holly Holm. That would have been a good one. Any fights that you think may be worth watching?
This is a weird card. Because it's the most boxing card that the UFC's ever done. And the way that let me elaborate on that a little bit. It's got a really, really strong main event. It's going to sell out the stadium just from the main event. People aren't coming to see anybody else, other than friends and family of a lot of the Australian fighters on this card. But it's being sold strictly on the merit of the main event and the juice of the main event. The co-main event is good, and the rest of the fights on it are kind of like regional fighters and unranked fighters for the most part. Like, that's how a boxing card is designed. So, I mean no disrespect to any of these fighters, but there's not really a fight that stands out to me outside of those two top fights. I watch every fight. Like, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to watch this. I'm not going to watch the Luke Jumo fight or anything like that. That's just not how I roll. I watch every single UFC fight, and I like every single UFC fight. I'm looking forward to watching the event as a whole, but there's not a single fight that really sticks out to me where I'm like, wow, I need to watch this. I think Jorgen De Castro versus Justin Tafa will be an exciting fight, but it's not one that I'm particularly I don't have it marked on my calendar, so to speak.
Fair enough. We haven't spoken in a while, so I'm going to run backwards some of the big fights that we haven't spoken about, and I want you to tell me which ones you've enjoyed the most and why. Last weekend, Jared Cannonier at middleweight knocks out Jack Hermansson in Denmark. That was a really nice one. Previous to that, you had the disappointing no contest, the finger poke, Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stevens in Mexico. And then previous to that, the knockout, Justin Gaethje over Donald Cerrone back in September. Of course, Khabib submits Dustin Poirier. That was in Abu Dhabi. And the women's strawweight title also changed hands since last we spoke. Weili Zhang, first-round knockout of Jessica Andrade. And, of course, Stipe wins the heavyweight title back. Which of those collection of fights interested you the most in terms of result and why?
Well, Stipe versus Cormier, I think, was an all-timer. And I'm happy they're going to run this back for a third time because Cormier had that fight. Like, Cormier, this is the thing. You always look at the result and you say, okay, Stipe beat him. But Cormier was winning, if that fight was, 17 minutes, Cormier was winning 15 of those minutes. He really put it on Stipe, and Stipe was able to weather the storm and then was able to go to the body and just wear out a tired Daniel Cormier, and that was a very, very slick strategy. And Stipe admitted that he had a lot of trouble getting started in that fight. And I think that when you look at that particular fight, that rematch is going to be great. Cowboy versus Gaethje wasn't much of a fight. I thought, I thought Gaethje was going to win that fight. I didn't think it was going to be in that kind of fashion. Like, he really put it on Cerrone. I thought Zhang versus Andrade was the biggest surprise of all those fights. Like, if you would have told me Zhang's going to win this fight and asked me how, I would have said, okay, probably a 5-round decision. She's going to outpoint her. For her to finish her in, 45 seconds, that's not like an unbelievable result. Like, Jessica Andrade isn't someone who gets knocked out frequently, like that was a pretty wild turn of events. And then even this past weekend, Hermansson versus Cannonier. Cannonier stopped every single different offensive maneuver that Hermansson threw at him, tired him out early, and was able to finish him with strikes. And Cannonier is legit. He's now a top 5 middleweight, and I think that he's earned that with his last 3 fights.
Yeah, I agree. That was exciting, especially, considering the build in Denmark. Jack Hermansson, the higher-ranked fighter, had everything going for him. Even you watch the promo, you're like, man, I think that people were considering Jack Hermansson was going to win that one. And Cannonier just showed, he is a real class fighter. Moving forward, you got Chris Weidman's debut in 2 weeks' time at the TD Garden versus Dominic Reyes at lightweight. You've also got Ben Askren, his 3rd fight in the UFC. He's going to fight Damian Maia, which should be a great grappling match. That's on October 26th. And then you got the Bad MFer title at MSG, Madison Square Gardens, Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz. And then, of course, the big one that everyone has been talking about. But before that, of course, you got Max Holloway putting his belt on, featherweight title against Volkanovski. And then Colby Covington finally gets his fight against Kamaru Usman. Speak to me a little bit about some of those fights and why you're looking forward to them.
Well, the BMF title kind of sells itself. I think that fight is just, there's no beef. It's just 2 guys that are exciting to watch, that are really coming into their own as superstars in this sport, facing off against one another. That one's going to be cool for that very reason. And I think that the winner of that fight could be in line for the next welterweight shot. No disrespect to Leon Edwards, but I think that this is a promotion. I think that those 2 fighters are very easy to promote. I don't know if Nate Diaz has said he doesn't even really want to fight Kamaru Usman, but if Covington ends up winning the title and you could do Covington versus Nate Diaz, like, that would be a lot of fun. And then, in addition to that, you mentioned you had Joanna versus Watterson. That's a fun one, because I think the winner of that fight is going to end up fighting Zhang next. And Reyes versus Weidman, I think the winner of that fight is likely in line next to fight Jones. You kind of have to see what else happens with the Corey Anderson and Walker fight at UFC 244. Or is it 240? Yeah, 244. Whoever comes out of those 2 fights and looks the best will probably get the next shot at Jones. And I think it's actually great to see, because you got 2 young fighters in Walker and Reyes that are coming up in a division that's been, primarily a lot of the same faces for some time. So looking forward to those particular ones as well. And then you mentioned the end of year card. Not only do you have Holloway and Volkanovski and Covington Usman, you've also got Durand May and Amanda Nunes. So you have 3 title fights on the line in that particular card. Usman versus Covington to me is a real puzzle, because I think that they're just such similar fighters. They both love volume, both wrestling-based fighters. Both will have great takedown defense. I don't expect a whole lot of takedowns in that fight. And then offensively, if they're striking, Covington has the volume advantage, and I think that Usman has the power advantage, but is also a pretty voluminous striker in his own, in his own accord. So those fights all are of strong interest to me, because I think they all have big implications in the different divisions. Not, obviously outside of the title fights, of course, are the implications of the divisions. Those are the title fights. But there's a lot to look forward to before the end of the year here.
All right, his name is Aaron Bronsteter. He is the mixed martial arts reporter for TSN in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Thank you for joining us, as always, Aaron.
Hey, my pleasure, Jordan. Anytime.
All right, that's it for Let's Talk Sports. Join us every Saturday at 9 a.m. right here on 94.9 Bob FM. For Hurley's Media, I'm the sports guy, and I'm out.